Across the wide and lonesome prairie, the Oregon Trail Diary of Hattie Campbell, 1847, by Christiana Gregory. October 24th, 1847, Sunday. Rain crept under the tent and soaked my pillows, which is where I keep this journal. But now the back pages are so soggy they tore. I am almost at the very last page. December 23rd, 1847, Thursday. It's been a long time since I wrote. We now have a cabin. There's a window that looks out to the road leading into town. I'm sitting at our new little table on a new three-legged stool, both built by Pa. Behind me is a stone fireplace with 2 hens roasting and a kettle boiling for tea. Ma and Aunt June are rolling pie dough, and Pepper is by the hearth rocking River to sleep. She must practice because sometime in the spring she and Gideon will have a new baby themselves. Pa and Mr. Lewis built them a cozy room in our barn, so in a way our dream of living next door to each other has come true. Aunt June just called over to me, her hands gooey with flour. "Remember, Hattie, tell the good and the bad." So I will. Last week men rode into town with news that just about broke Aunt June's heart. On November 29th, her friend Narcissa Whitman was murdered along with her husband Marcus and 12 others, many of them children. We don't know the whole story, but it seems there was a measles epidemic. When some Indian children died, the Cayuse thought Dr. Whitman was a sorcerer, so they burned down the mission. Aunt June can't believe she'll never see her friend, the very friend who inspired her to come West in the first place. We've all talked long hours about what if we had gone to the mission for the winter. If we had, I wouldn't be writing this. Ma said God's plan is bigger than us, and it's impossible to guess why he lets things happen the way they do. There's so much I don't understand. In the 2 months we've been in Oregon City, the men have worked hard to put up houses. Many are still in tents or snug under wooden lean-tos, such as Mrs. Kenkler. Somehow she managed to bring her wagon over the Blues and the Cascades. What she had in it no one knows. Her tent is at the end of our street. Sometimes we see her walk through the mud into town, a basket on her arm. She is shunned by many of the folks from our wagon train, including me. When Ma said she wanted to invite Mrs. Kenker to our celebration dinner, I said, "No, absolutely no. Not until she says she's sorry." Ma smiled. She and Aunt June were setting the table for tea with our new cups from Fort Vancouver. "Hattie," she said, "in order to move on, we must forgive the past. Sometimes that means forgiving someone who hasn't apologized and probably never will. We don't have to forget what happened." Ma poured boiling water into our new teapot. Squares of ginger cake sprinkled with powdered sugar were stacked on our new tin platter. Almost nothing survived our trip, just a small amount of money that Pa said is hardly worth counting, the worn-out shoes on our feet, our clothes, some blankets, my journal, and Ma's spoon and her little plate that I carried over the mountains in my pocket. We've all written letters to friends in Boonville, telling them to come to Oregon. Pa rode our mail to the fort. From there the letters will go out on the next clipper ship bound for the East Coast. It'll take at least 6 months for them to sail south around Cape Horn, then back up to Boston, then by wagon and riverboat to Missouri. Becky may not read my letter for another year. Christmas 1847. It is late and everyone's in bed. I'm writing by our new lamp. The wick is floating in whale oil that Pa got in trade from Fort Vancouver. At noon Christmas Day our guests begin arriving. Wade came with his parents, and Mr. Big wheeled himself over with the Andersons. He's living with them in a special room they built him. He brought a gift for each child, a small canvas sack that he cut and sewed from his old tent, each with a whistle inside that he carved from Oregon pine. Tall Joe came with the sea captain, who's staying in Portland, and some neighbors who moved here a year ago. The family with the twins, Sarah and Blue, brought cranberry pies. The last person to show up was Mrs. Kinker. She stood off by herself as if she wanted to join in but didn't know how. I had hoped she would arrive with gifts for all of us by way of saying she's sorry, but she was empty-handed. Dinner lasted 4 hours because we took turns without our few chairs and plates and cups. Whoever wasn't eating was talking or holding a baby. During this confusion I kept my eye on Mrs. Kinker. Several times she reached down to comfort a crying child, but stopped herself, not sure if she should, I reckon. Several times she went to the kitchen to help, but seemed timid, like she didn't want to bother any of the women busy there. She seemed so lonely, my heart began to soften. I hurried behind the curtain that hides my bed. Under my pillow is where I keep these treasures: this journal, Ma's silver spoon, and a small china plate with roses on it. I took off the sash to my apron. It is blue and about 4 inches wide, so I wrapped it around the spoon until it looked like a real present. I tied it up with a piece of string and lay a fresh pine bow on top. I found Mrs. Kenker at the door, just putting on her shawl. As she stepped out in the damp air, I called, "Merry Christmas," then handed her my gift. Light from the window made a patch of yellow on the ground. Gently she undid the wrapping. When she saw what it was, her eyes grew moist. "Thank you, Hattie," she whispered. We stood there a moment in the cold. She touched my cheek, then walked to the road. I felt good. For the first time in months I wanted to be kind to Mrs. Kenker. Maybe what Ma said yesterday is true. She said, "If you give forth, you are beginning to forgive." But I'm not ready to part with my grandmother's plate. Well, I have much to think about, but before I blow out the lamp, when I turned around to go back in the house, Wade was waiting for me in the doorway. He is taller than when we first met back in Missouri, and tonight he wore a new cloth coat with a string tie. He was smiling when he stepped out and took my arm. "Come on, Hattie." We could hear music coming from the barn. There were fiddlers, and the sea captain was playing a banjo. When I saw Mama out on the dance floor with Pa, her arm looped through his and her head thrown back in laughter, I knew we were really, truly, finally in Oregon. Just like that. Epilogue. The families who arrived in Oregon City prospered. On May 15, 1848, Pepper and Gideon had a baby boy named Michael, who was to be the oldest of 7 brothers. On Christmas Eve of that year, Wade and Hattie were married. They were unable to have children of their own, but adopted the 6-year-old twins Sarah and Blue when their parents died in a buggy crash. For the rest of their lives, Hattie and Pepper shared a fence and a vegetable garden. The Anderson family started an inn on their fruit ranch. Mr. Big lived with them and became well known as a tailor and a favorite uncle to the many children who visited. Mrs. Kenker lived alone in a cottage at the edge of town. One summer afternoon in 1849, Hattie went to visit, but found her dead on the kitchen floor. The constable said Mrs. Kenker had died from a heart attack at least 2 weeks prior. Aunt June and Uncle Tim had 3 sons, Henry, Tom, and Adam, who all struck out for California mining camps in search of gold. Their sister, River Ann, married Paddy O'Reilly, a famous tenor with the San Francisco Opera. In 1906, Aunt June's granddaughter, Daisy Valentine, would be one of the survivors of San Francisco's great earthquake and fire.